Hello guys, for all you beginner fishermen, you might want to ask, what kind of setup do you use to catch your glorious fish? Well, I generally use one of four setups, depending on what I'm actually fishing for. So we're going to go through each one of them in this video. Now, the rod and the reel I use is not going to be the one that I usually use. I usually use like very heavy rod and reel for the most part. I basically just got a broken like spin cast reel that I'm using as a demonstration. So like I would usually use like a medium to medium heavy with like maybe like a 5-6 thousand size reel in combination with braid line. But this I'm just using as an example, so the rod and reel doesn't really matter. It's just like the setup of the rig. We're going to start with the most basic rig, and I'm using basically a steel leader. I think this is 40 or 50 pound. Usually the line would be about 50 or 65 pound, and what we're doing is the leader I have has like a swivel already attached to it, so that prevents the sinker from sliding all the way to the hook. I prefer to use about a foot sinker. I think this one's a 9-inch one. I'm just using an example, but usually I prefer about a foot sinker. Now, a 9-inch one like this will work perfectly fine if you have an egg sinker that gets stopped this way by the swivel, or if you have like one of those like medallion sinkers that gets stopped this way as well. However, if you have a regular bank sinker that goes like sideways, you will want a longer leader, probably 12 or 18 inches, just so like the fish have a less chance of actually seeing the sinker. For catfish, it doesn't matter. Sometimes for carp or buffalo, it does actually matter. At the end, of course, you attach a hook. This is a bottom bait. The metal leader does not float well. This hook is a walleye hook. This is a long shank number 4 Aberdeen hook. However, for walleye, I do not actually recommend this particular setup. It's much better for another setup on walleye. This hook generally, like I think like hooking a smaller version of this is pretty good for bluegill and stuff like that. It will hook catfish, but and carp, but I would actually recommend a bigger hook than a number 4 for those. Generally, what I do use when I'm fishing is when I'm going for small bait fish, I use either just like a number 8 J hook, or a lot of times a number 4 circle hook. And of course, like if I'm going for bigger catfish, it depends on the size of the bait. For channels, especially like the ones in Lake Mendota, I prefer the 7/0. For big flatheads, I will use a 10/0 hook, and those are huge. I don't have them on me right now. I just basically have this one and basically the 4/0 circle hooks on me right now. And I will use the 4/0 circle hooks for catfish as well, but for smaller catfish. Like if I go for maybe 2-3 pound catfish, I go for the 4/0 circle hooks. But this is my most basic bottom rig. Simple, a leader with a swivel, steel leader with a swivel, and just an egg attached about a foot away from the hook. My basic bottom rig, and this is the one I use basically for just about any kind of bottom fishing. One thing I will want to say about this particular setup, I actually, unlike most people, my line will be slightly stronger than my leader, because I would rather my leader break off if I get clog somewhere. Generally, like the line and leader won't break as long as you set your drag right, but if you get like stuck on a rock or something, I would rather have the leader break off, because then I still get my weight back. And yes, the leader and the hook are significantly less expensive than my weight, because a lot of times when I get stuck, I'm using the huge weights in fast current, and they're like 4 or 5 ounces. And those are like $1 or $2 pop, whereas the hooks are like 20-30 cents a pop, and the leaders are like, 20-30 cents a pop as well. So I'd much rather just be able to retain the weight than the hook and the leader. And obviously metal leaders, you don't have to be afraid of abrasion, and pike aren't going to bite through them. So yeah, that's just a little thing. That's why my line is usually slightly stronger than my leader. So the next rig I use is the Lindy or Carolina rig, and those two are interchangeable. They're basically the same thing. There is one thing I forgot that I need to build this rig with that I don't have in my room right now, and that's a bead. So I'm going to tell you where the bead actually goes. For this rig, you need a main line through either a bullet weight or a bank weight. Generally for a Lindy rig, it is like maybe a 1/2 ounce weight. Whether for a Carolina rig, however, it is generally like a 2 ounce weight. I mean, you can use these with 4 or 5s with Carolinas. That's fine. And the swivel you use isn't a 3-way usually. It's just a 2-way regular swivel. I just have a 3-way because I don't have any 2-ways on me right now. Been using the Wolf River rig, but like this is a Lindy or Carolina rig. And what happens is like you have the main line through a weight like this, and then you have a bead somewhere here on the main line, depending on where you want the weight to actually stop. Usually it's probably like 6 inches or so in front of the actual weight, in front of the actual swivel, maybe a foot in front of the actual swivel, depending on what your preference is. And that basically stops the weight from sliding. So you want a sliding weight and a bead to stop the sliding weight where you want it to stop sliding. And of course, on the other side of the swivel, you have your leader line. And of course, at the end of the line, you have an Aberdeen hook with your bait. Now, once again, if you're using walleye, if you're fishing for walleye, you probably want an Aberdeen because those actually work the best for me for walleye. If you're fishing for gar with this, I mean, I would use like a treble or something. If you're fishing for bass, maybe a circle or a regular J. And if you're fishing for catfish or carp, probably like a stronger circle or a stronger J. So the purpose of this rig that I would use over my other rig is it does actually keep the bait floating in the water a little bit more. So like, if you're fishing with minnows for walleye and current, this is definitely better than that. Although if you throw in strong enough current, like the metal leader will actually work as well. But even if you're fishing for something like flatheads and you have a big hook attached to the end of your leader and you have a piece of cut bait, if you throw in current with this rig, that cut bait will look lively, and flatheads like lively bait. So I would actually use this for flatheads. Now I'm actually using a 50-pound braid right now for the leader, and that's usually what I would actually use because I rarely fish in crystal clear water. But if you're fishing in crystal clear water, you probably want fluoro because fluoro disappears in water and braid does not. I've used braid for this rig basically forever. It works perfectly fine. I rarely, if ever, fish in crystal clear water, and as long as it's a little bit murky, the fish don't really mind the line because it's not nearly as visible as, say, like a big, heavy, like a black metal leader. So this is just fine for most things, and this will actually work for catfish, walleye, bass, etc. I mainly use it for walleye, and that's why I always have the Aberdeen hook and a small minnow. And yes, sturgeons will bite it too. If you watch my last video, sturgeons basically bite anything that's on the bottom at this point of the year. So essentially, once again, you have a kind of like a bullet weight, a bead under the bullet weight, depending on how far you want or not want it to slide, a two-way swivel, not a three-way, and basically a leader. I'm using about 2.5 foot right now. It could be 3 or 4 foot if you want it to be a little bit further away or float up a little bit higher, and a hook at the end depending on what you're going. Once again, walleye, Aberdeen hook. Crappie, this works fine as well. A bluegill, you want a smaller Aberdeen hook most likely. And for catfish, you probably just want a circle hook, a bigger circle hook. So that is the Lindy or Carolina rig. And remember, you do have to have a bead in front of this. So yeah, this is also kind of the rig I use for my flies for walleyes thing, except in that one, this weight is significantly smaller, usually about half an ounce, and I'm actually using a much smaller pole and reel setup. So I would actually be using something like 10, 15-pound braid as my main line with a like half an ounce attached here with a small bead here, a swivel, and then about a liter this long, more or less. And then I would actually be, instead of a hook, I would directly have like a fly. Let me get a fly here. Yeah, so if I'm doing flies for eyes, instead of a hook, I would be attaching one of these things. Make sure to get the ones with big noticeable eyes. That works way better for walleyes than ones without eyes. Basically what you do is you fling it out as far as you can, and then you just give, you reel it while giving jerks back to have the fly move through the water. Works really well for walleye. So if you ever see me do like flies for walleyes, that's it. These flies usually cost like $2.50, $3. Worth it. Get a couple of them, especially for spring walleye season. That's how you catch the walleye outside of the bottom bait rigs. So yeah, flies for walleyes, this is exactly what you use. One more comment on that Lindy rig. If you are using that Lindy rig with a small sucker for muskies or pike, it is crucial that you do actually use fluoro string for the leader. If you use braid, you can use mono as well. You can't use braid for walleyes and pike because walleye and pike teeth, not walleye, pike and muskie teeth will cut right through that braid. So if you're doing like muskie or pike, make sure that your leader line is really strong mono or fluoro. Now, the next one you've probably been seeing me use a lot lately. It's called the Wolf River or three-way rig. Now, what it is like your main line hooks into a three-way swivel. One of the other lines hooks into a generally what most people would use as a weaker line, and that actually has a very small distance, maybe like 5-6 inches to a weight. I'm using a 2 ounce here, but you adjust that as you go. And the other three-way loop actually is on a much longer line. Right now it's about 2.5 foot, but usually probably 2 foot's the best. And that goes to a hook. Right now I'm using the Aberdeen hook. And usually I would place a minnow here because, the minnow's in current. It's very good for walleye. This is actually, I use the Wolf River rig primarily for walleye. I've caught sturgeons, catfish, and everything else with it as well, but generally I use it for a walleye. And this particular rig is very good for keeping bait and flow off the bottom, probably even better than the Lindy or Carolina rig, because you have split off another one like over here. I prefer to keep this line kind of short. Some people prefer it a little bit longer. I prefer it kind of shorter, but this is the one that really keeps the bait kind of like flowing in the current. And if you want like lively or moving bait, this is the best one. Now, this particular rig has the most potential to actually tangle. So I've been favoring like the Carolina rig a little bit more than this one because this one is a little bit more complex to tie. It takes a little bit more time and it tends to tangle more. And it's a little bit more of a mess. But it's definitely a very, very good rig if you want like your minnows or your bait to float in current. Once again, this would work for pike or walleye, but on the main leader, you will want fluoro and not braid. And generally, like I said, most people like on their off leader where they tie the weight, they do tie it basically a lighter line. So like the weight, if it gets caught and jammed on something, you can break off and you don't lose the rest of your rig. So that is the three-way or Wolf River rig. Very, very popular in Wisconsin. And last of all, but certainly not least of all, we have the Dropshot rig. Now, this rig is great if you like using wacky worms, or if you're fishing off like a platform, or like a boat especially, and you want to drop the bait to the bottom, but you want your hook to be a certain amount of distance from the bottom. Now, the way I have this set up, this is probably like 7-8 inches from the bottom, but if you want like a foot from the bottom, just move the hook up. So how this rig actually works is you tie a hook basically in the middle of your line right here, and then your weight comes a couple of inches or a couple of feet below this particular hook. It's called drop shot essentially because you don't, I don't know if you really cast this or not. I generally, when I use this, I'm fishing off a platform or I'm fishing on a boat, which is rare, but I do fish off boats sometimes. And I essentially just drop this line down more or less. I basically just drop this line down, and I wait until I feel this weight actually hits the bottom, and I basically tighten my reel, and basically that's when I know that this particular hook is that far off the bottom. Usually a lot of times in deeper water, I want it a foot or two off the bottom, and this actually works very well for quite a lot of fish. Now, it's not one where you would cast, this is not a rig that you would cast like super far out from shore, because obviously you have some slack in the line when you do that, and then this particular part of the hook might just be on the bottom as well, especially if you're not in strong current. Then this will be in strong current. It probably will actually blow off and will basically be this distance from the bottom. So it might actually be effective there as well. But generally a drop shot is exactly what it sounds like. You basically drop this rig off of like a boat, and it does very, very well. It always keeps the hook this much above the weight, and you can drop it to the bottom and adjust your weight. So this is very, very good for bass fishing with something like a wacky worm. So those are the four kinds of rigs I use. The basic bottom rig, which I showed first, the Carolina or Lindy rig, which I showed second, the Wolf River or three-way rig, which I showed third, and the drop shot rig, which I'm showing now. So hope you learned something from this. Ask me any questions, like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button, and I will see you guys later.